Okay, so I one of the main ones that I was sort of thinking about was what advice could you give to somebody who's also always associated diets with caloric restriction, and when they are attempting to go into surplus or gaining phases. So I mean this in terms of the psychology, getting their heads around the concept. So I'm sure that you've come across this before. Most bodybuilders, I think maybe more commonly with females, feel more comfortable in that deficit phase, watching the scale weight going down, as to watching the scale weight go up and body fat increasing, maybe into sort of uncomfortable territory. So what do you feel about those topics there?
Oh yeah, that's such a good question. That this comes up often in what you describe as the recovery phase of the
Yeah.
diet. So if you think about you've got four phases or six phases or however many you want, but very briefly, you've got the improvement phase whereby we're trying to make gains in terms of our muscle mass over the season, and we're trying to maintain our body fat levels. Then you've got the on season phase or the cutting phase where we're trying to lose the body fat while maintaining muscle. You've got your peak week, which might be an hour phase that we just spoke about, and then you've got the recovery phase, which is coming off of the diet. The recovery phase, we're trying to then add the fat back on, and then obviously mean, but not too much, and then we're trying to recover the muscle mass and then recover any physiological and psychological function which might have been compromised as a consequence. So people often struggle with giving up their on-season contest body because they're ripped and they feel good about themselves and it looks great, right? And women in particular, yeah, I think you see this more so with them, and the data probably supports this. Certainly, the research that I've done from surveying bodybuilders and their attitudes around food and body dysmorphic disorder, you see higher what we call body uneasiness amongst females just in general in the population. Yeah, aside from bodybuilders. Now, what's interesting, right, is if you survey bodybuilders about body uneasiness, is that as they get closer to their ideal, e.g., their stage weight, body uneasiness typically goes down, which is kind of like the reverse of what you might think, right? Because you might think, well, people are pursuing this hypermuscular physique, but they'll never be happy, right? And that's the concept of kind of like bigorexia, if you like, or the Adonis complex, which is you look in the mirror and you're never satisfied. But actually, it's not necessarily true. So what's happening is you're going from this physique that you actually think, I look great, to, oh, I'm not going to be as happy. And the psychometric questionnaires kind of show that flip in terms of the mindset around this. So that's I suppose the framing around it from there. Now it depends on the individuals, yeah, because you get different types of people will cope with this better. But you have to make it clear to whoever it is that you're working with that you're going to have your off-season body and you're going to have your on-season body. And if you want to be the best athlete you can possibly be, you need to get used to the fact that that requires you to have some fat on your physique to maintain function and to progress and to make improvements, because being completely restricted all the time holds you back from being able to be the best athlete you can possibly be. So it's a mindset shift in terms of we're doing this for an athletic pursuit and rationalizing it from that perspective rather than an emotional perspective, which is, I want to just hold on to this look. Well, you can have that look, but the next time it comes around to being a competitor on stage, you're not going to have made those improvements. So, what do you value more? Do you value being the athlete and all the physiological function and all that? Or do you value that moment in time that you look like this and holding that, even though that'll hold you back in the long run? So that's the kind of the framing of it that I kind of try and do. Now that's easier said than done, but if you can frame it that way and set goals and be person centered and get someone to reflect on their behaviors, then that can be helpful. Is that how you would approach it, James? I don't know what you think. And that's quite a long
Yeah, I was
response to
just
your
no, I think that was perfect. That wasn't long. That was just the right amount. Like, yeah, I just wrote a note there while you were sort of speaking, and the question that I had written down there was, so does social media make gaining weight more difficult? We talk about this from a psychological perspective because once upon a time before social media, if you competed in bodybuilding, whenever I first competed in bodybuilding, I wasn't on social media, so you weren't sharing your updates or your striations for likes. Essentially, that was pretty much saved for the
Yeah,
stage, and I trained in a studio, so nobody else really got to see my physique. So it was literally just it's easier to let that go whenever
yeah,
I think whenever people are putting values on, if I put a post up whenever I'm shredded, ultra lean, and I'm getting 300 likes, as opposed to
yeah,
whenever I'm off
yeah,
season, puffy and
yeah.
fluffy, even if you did the same post, you get 36 likes. I think that psychology really affects people and their willingness to let that condition go. And then at
I
that
agree.
point, whenever you're dealing with clients, I'm like going, look, before we go into this process, I want to ask you the question, which is more important? And this is whenever you realize what is the reason that person is doing bodybuilding. If they're doing it because they love the sport, they'll make the right decisions and they'll get over the psychological flaws that they have with that process. So they'll, go, right, if surplus is where I need to go, that's what I'm going to do in order to be a better bodybuilder the next time I walk on stage. If somebody is doing this because they're an Instagram bodybuilder, and then they're going to find that more difficult, I think, to
Yeah,
let that
no,
condition go.
I 100% agree. You're so right. You're spot on with everything you've said there. Economists talk about this, and they talk about incentive structures. And what you've described there is you've described two things. There's a social incentive, e.g., adulation, popularity. If there's a negative social incentive, you don't do something, e.g., you get told off in public for doing something and you made to feel shame, then you don't do that behavior. If you get adulation and positive feedback for what you do and in a social setting, then you do more of that, right? So that comes
Yeah.
to your point about being a social media bodybuilder. And then there's the other incentives that economists talk about, a financial incentive. Yeah. So if you're making a living and promoting yourself and being an Instagram bar, then you're going to do more of that sort of stuff. And then what you're talking about is you're talking about what do you value? What matters to you? Do you want to be the athlete? Then you need to give up on the body that you've got for the stage, or maybe find some sort of compromise, or do you want to be the social media bodybuilder? And look, there's nothing wrong with that if you want to be the social media bodybuilder, but you've also got to accept that that might not be the best for your progress. And then the other thing is, like, comparison is the thief of joy is a classic quote, and it's very, very true. Um, in fact, Joe, I can go off on a tangent. I'm going to leave it there. I agree, right? And hopefully that what I've said there supports what you're saying. I think it does.
Yeah. No, I think that's bang on.